sense.
There were a group of candle makers that talked of a grave threat to their industry. They said, "We are suffering from the ruinous competition of a rival who apparently works under conditions so far superior to our own for the production of light that he is flooding the domestic market with it at an incredibly low price." End quote, to quote Frederick Bastiat. And who was that competitor? Why, the sun! The sun was firing beams right through the windows of homes in French villages across the countryside. And this was providing daytime competition to the candle makers, who therefore did not have as much in profit as they would otherwise have absent this competition. So their solution was to ban windows, keep the light out. That way, they could sell more candles throughout the day, for use throughout the day, with less competition coming in from the outside world. And that is exactly what we're getting from the large broadcasting and entertainment corporations, the oligopoly that dominated the voice of Canadians for far too long, until the windows opened and we got the internet. See, what the internet did is it opened up competition. This is ironic, because we hear today that the news media is in trouble. They're hemorrhaging jobs and opportunities. They say that the cultural sector is suffering. And what is the cause of this suffering? Well, the cost of marketing, production, and distribution has plummeted. You heard that right. Because costs have gone down, the industry is suddenly suffering. Actually, it's not suffering. News media has never been more vibrant and more alive than it is today. It's just not the establishment oligopolistic media that dominates the voice around Parliament Hill. Those voices are suffering. They're losing audiences because Canadians actually have choice for a change. For the longest time, the oligopoly in this country, controlled by Bell, Rogers, Shaw, which is now Chorus, and a few other powerful corporate players, were able to use their might with the regulator to ensure their dominance across the airwaves and into the homes of Canadians. They were able to use the large moat, that is to say, the difficulty getting into the market that comes from the fact that you used to have to produce paper and ink in order to send your product to homes. And now all of those things have been knocked down, the windows have been opened, people can enter the marketplace with very few barriers. And so those powerful oligopolistic corporations are trying to reinstate the barriers. In other words, they're trying to block the windows to keep the light and the fresh air out so that they can dominate the candle making, or in their case, the news and culture making business. They don't want more Canadian culture. What they want is more control over Canadian culture. And here we have across the way, on the one side, it's the corporations want economic control over news and culture, and on this side, the government wants political control over news and culture. And so you have this alliance of big government and big business ganging up on the customer, forcing through this legislation the customer to consume content they would not otherwise be interested in. You see, right now, the big tech platforms are very simple. They're interested in making money. Let's be blunt about it. How do they do that? They feed people content that they want to see. That keeps them on the platform longer. And when this bill passes, those platforms will be interested in making money. And they will make just as much money, because nothing in this bill shuts down Netflix or YouTube or Facebook or anyone else. They will still be the dominant platforms. What will change is that instead of having algorithms that give people things they want to see, there will be algorithms that give people things the government wants them to see. And the government will operate through the CRTC, a large, woke government agency that will manipulate algorithms to promote so-called Canadian content. What is Canadian content? Well, they can't tell us. They suggest, for example, that Canadian content is a CBC article that is plagiarized in Washington about American politics. That would be an American-made story about American politics but it would be Canadian content because it would be provided by the state broadcaster in Canada. But a single mother who produces a video about raising funds for her local kids' sports team, that would not be Canadian content, because it would not be on the approved list that will be established by the CRTC. So in other words, a local Canadian story by a Canadian about local Canadians will not be considered Canadian content because she's not a news agency, she's not registered with any of these so-called cultural bodies, and therefore she will be pushed down the algorithm and given a smaller voice as more powerful corporate voices gain predominance. We know that this is public choice theory. Those with money turn that money into influence, and then they turn that influence into yet more money, which they then turn into more influence, and so on and so forth. You don't believe me? Look at the correlation in the amount that companies are spending on lobbying right now. Government spending is up 55% since this government took office. That is correlated with a nearly 100% increase in the number of paid lobbying interactions that have happened here in Ottawa, as recorded by the Lobbyist Registry. A company out of the United States did a similar study showing that the bigger the spending in Washington by the government there, the more corporations spend on lobbying the U.S. nation's capital. Nearly a perfect correlation between those two things. Why? Because if you have a bigger and more powerful government in the economy, then those seeking profit will invest in influencing that government in order to turn that influence into more money. And that is exactly what will happen here. A small group of broadcasting corporations who will have all of the influence, as they have in the writing of this bill, will be in the CRTC office every day asking for that algorithm to be just tweaked a little bit more so that they can end up in the news feeds or the YouTube streams of Canadians more than their competitor. And it will be a race for political power rather than a race for cultural, better cultural products. In other words, instead of pleasing your audience, you will get ahead by pleasing politicians and bureaucrats. That is what happens. The privileged elite will have more and more control and a greater voice, and the people on the ground will have less and less control. And ironically, this will run against everything that the parties across the way claim to say they want. They claim they're for diversity. Diversity is our strength, says the Prime Minister. Yet, this bill, by giving a small oligopoly control over what Canadians see on the internet, will mean obviously less diversity, because it will be only the programming that they favor. Do you think the ethnocultural publications are going to get the same deal from the CRTC that the CBC, that Bell Canada, that Rogers, and other telecommunications behemoths are going to get? Of course not. They don't have, the small Punjabi paper in Surrey does not have a lobbyist in Ottawa that can work on the CRTC. Do you think that's specialty cultural products, like, for example, you think of a Jewish community who likes klezmer, the wonderful, wonderful Jewish jazz music, might not have a big enough audience to generate political power at the CRTC. But under the current situation, at least through the tap of their thumb, they can get the music that they want. That music will not be considered Canadian enough by the corporations who will generate the algorithm with the CRTC, and therefore those more diverse and unique voices will be shut out and deprived of online oxygen. So there will be less diversity. They claim they want to take power away from big corporations, yet this bill does precisely the opposite, concentrating power in the hands of a small number of broadcasting and telecommunications behemoths, the ones who've been lobbying so hard for so long to get this bill passed. They claim, Mr. Speaker, that they want more artistic expression, and yet the artistic expression of people who are not part of the established cultural scene will be snuffed out altogether. Even great Canadian artists who have never been associated with conservatism have spoken up against this bill. Look at the words of Margaret Atwood, who actually said that this bill represents creeping totalitarianism, and that is exactly what it is. When the government decides what the people can see and say, then freedom of expression will not be long to live in this country. We in this country, in this party, believe in Section 2B of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. To be or not to be? That is the question. And conservatives have an answer. We will repeat